Hello, I'm Benjamin Burrow from Wasatch High School, but no one cares about me, so let's get right into this. President numero uno is George Washington, who served from 1789 to 1797. He was a Federalist, or you could say he has no party, and he has major items including the Judiciary Act of 1789, the French Revolution of 1789, the Tariff of 1789, the Whiskey Rebellion of 1794, the Jay Treaty with England in 1794, the Pinckney Treaty with Spain in 1795, his farewell address 1796, or the First Bank in 1791. Our second president was John Adams, who served from 1797 to 1801, and he was a Federalist. Some of his major items include the XYZ Affair of 1797, the Alien and Sedition Acts from 1798, the Midnight Judges from 1801, and the Kentucky and Virginia Resolutions in 1798. The third president is Thomas Jefferson, who served from 1801 to 1809. He was a Democratic Republican, and some of his major items include Marbury v. Madison court case of 1803, the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, the Lewis and Clark expeditions from 1804 to 1805, the 12th Amendment in 1804, the Embargo Act in 1807, and the Non-Intercourse Act of 1809. The fourth president was James Madison, who served from 1809 to 1817. Some of his major items include the Macon Act of 1810, the Berlin and Milan Decrees, the Orders in Council, the War Hawks from 1811 to 1812, the War of 1812, Hartford Convention of 1814, and the First Protective Tariff in 1816. Our fifth president was James Monroe, who served from 1817 to 1825. His major items include the Marshall Court decisions, which include McCulloch v. Maryland in 1819, the Dartmouth College case in 1819, and Gibbons v. Ogden in 1824. It also includes the acquisition of Florida from Spain in 1819, the Missouri Compromise in 1820, the Monroe Doctrine in 1823, and the sectional tariff in 1824. Our sixth president is John Quincy Adams, who served from 1825 to 1829, and he was a Democrat-Republican. His major items include the Tariff of Abominations in 1828, Calhoun's Exposition and Protest in 1828, and New York's Erie Canal. The seventh U.S. president was Andrew Jackson, who served from 1829 to 1837, and he was the first Democrat president. His major items include Jacksonian democracy, the tariffs of 1832 and 1833, the Second Bank of the United States, which will expire in 1836, and the formation of the Whig Party in 1832. The eighth U.S. president was Martin Van Buren, who served from 1837 to 1841. He was a Democrat. Some of his major items include the Panic of 1837, the rebellion against the British from Canada in 1837, the seizure of the ship Caroline, and the Arbitration Commission in 1838. The ninth U.S. president was William Henry Harrison, who served in 1841. He was the first Whig president, and he died. The 10th U.S. president is John Tyler, who served from 1841 to 1845. He was an anti-Jackson Democrat. He ran and was elected as vice president on the Whig ticket. His major items include the Webster-Ashburton Treaty of 1842 and the vetoing of Clay's bill for the Third Bank of the United States and the setting of the Canadian border at the 45th parallel. The 11th U.S. president is James K. Polk, who served from 1845 to 1849. He was a Democrat. His major items include Texas becoming a state in 1845, the Oregon boundary being settled in 1846, the Wilmot Proviso in 1846, the Mexican War from 1846 to 1848, and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. The 12th U.S. president was Zachary Taylor, who served from 1849 to 1850. He was a Whig, and he died. The 13th U.S. president is Millard Fillmore, who served from 1850 to 1853. He was a Whig. His major items include the Compromise of 1850, the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty in 1850, and Uncle Tom's Cabin being published in 1852. The 14th president is Franklin Pierce, He served from 1853 to 1857, and he was a Democrat. His major items include the Kansas-Nebraska Bill in 1854, the Japan opened to world trade in 1853, the Underground Railroad, Bleeding Kansas, and the Ostend Manifesto in 1854. Our 15th U.S. president was James Buchanan, who served from 1857 to 1861, and he was a Democrat. His major items include Dred Scott versus Stanford in 1857, Lincoln-Douglas debates, and the South Carolina secession in 1860. Our 16th president was Abraham Lincoln, who served from 1861 to 1865. He was a Republican, and his major items include the Civil War from 1861 to 1865, the Homestead Act of 1862, the 10% Plan, the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863, Lincoln's assassination in 1865. The 17th U.S. president was Andrew Johnson, who served from 1865 to 1869. He was a Republican. His major items include the 13th Amendment in 1865, the 14th Amendment in 1868, the Amnesty Plan in 1865, Military Reconstruction Plan in 1868, the Tenure of Office Act in 1868, the Impeachment Trial in 1868, the formation of the KKK, and the adoption of black codes. The 18th U.S. president was Ulysses S. Grant, who served from 1869 to 1877, and he was a Republican. His major items include the First Transcontinental Railroad in 1869, the 15th Amendment in 1870, the Tweed Ring, the Panic of 1873, the Credit Mobilier Scandal, and the Whiskey Ring. The 19th U.S. president is Rutherford B. Hayes, who served from 1877 to 1881, and he was a Republican. His major items include the Bland-Allison Act and the Compromise of 1877. The 20th U.S. president was James A. Garfield, who served in 1881. He was a Republican, and he died. The 21st U.S. president was Chester A. Arthur, who served from 1881 to 1885. He was a Republican, and his major items include the Pendleton Civil Service Act in 1883, the Geneva Convention, and the Edmunds Act. The 22nd U.S. president was Grover Cleveland. He served in 1885 to 1889, and he was a Democrat. His major items include the Knights of Labor in 1886, the Haymarket Riot in 1886, the Interstate Commerce Act in 1887, and Washburn versus Illinois in 1886. The 23rd U.S. president is Benjamin Harrison, who served from 1889 to 1893, and he was a Republican. His major items include the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, the Populist Party Platform of 1892, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, and Washington becoming states in 1889, Idaho and Wyoming becoming states in 1890, the McKinley Tariff of 1890, and the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. The 24th U.S. president is Grover Cleveland for the second time. He, this time, served from 1893 to 1897. He was a Democrat, and his major items this time include the Panic of 1893, the Hawaiian Incident of 1893, the Venezuelan Boundary Affair of 1895, the Pullman Strike in 1894, the American Federation of Labor, and the Wilson-Gorman Tariff of 1894. The 25th U.S. president was William McKinley, who served from 1897 to 1901, and he was a Republican. His major items include New Imperialism, the Spanish-American War in April 1898 to February 1899, the Open Door Policy of 1899, the Boxer Rebellion in 1900, and his assassination in 1901. The 26th U.S. president was Theodore Roosevelt, who served from 1901 to 1909, and he was a Republican. Some of his major items include the Panama Canal, which started in 1903, Big Stick Diplomacy, the Square Deal, the Portsmouth Treaty in 1905, the Gentleman's Agreement with Japan in 1904, the Pure Food and Drug Act, the Meat Inspection Act, and the Muckrakers in 1906, the political reforms of the Roosevelt era, trust busting, the coal strike, the Venezuelan debt controversy in 1902, the Dominican Republic crisis from 1902 to 1905, and the Algeriras Conference over Morocco in 1906. The 27th U.S. President is William H. Taft, who served from 1909 to 1913. He was a Republican. His major items include the Payne-Aldrich Tariff of 1909, the Pinchot-Bollinger controversy, the 16th Amendment, and dollar diplomacy. The 28th U.S. President was Woodrow Wilson, who served from 1913 to 1921. He was a Democrat, and his major items include the Underwood Tariff of 1913, the 17th, 18th, and 19th Amendments, the Federal Reserve System in 1913, the Federal Trade Commission in 1914, the Clayton Antitrust Act in 1914, moral diplomacy, sending troops to Nicaragua, Dominican Republic, Haiti, the Virgin Islands, and Mexico, World War I from 1914 to 1918, the Lusitania sunk, the Zimmermann Telegram, the 14 Points in 1917, and the Treaty of Versailles in 1919 to 1920. The 29th U.S. President was Warren G. Harding, who served from 1921 to 1923. He was a Republican. His major items include the Teapot Dome Scandal, the Washington Conference from 1921 to 1922, and the Fordney-McCumber Tariff in 1922. The 30th U.S. President was Calvin Coolidge, who served from 1923 to 1929. He was a Republican, and his major items include the Dawes Plan of 1924, the Immigration Act of 1924, and the Kellogg-Briand Pact of 1928. The 31st U.S. President was Herbert Hoover, who served from 1929 to 1933. He was a Republican. His major items include the National Origins Act in 1929, the Panic and Depression and Stock Market Crash of 1929, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff of 1930, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, the Bonus Army, and the 20th Amendment. The 32nd President was Franklin D. Roosevelt, who served from 1933 to 1945. He was a Democrat. His major items include the New Deal, the 21st Amendment, the Second New Deal, the Court Packing Scheme, and World War II. He was also the first and only president to serve for more than 8 years. The 33rd president was Harry S. Truman, who served from 1945 to 1953, and he was a Democrat. His major items include the Potsdam Conference of 1945, the World War II end in 1945, the Taft-Hartley Act in 1947, the Truman Doctrine in 1947, the Marshall Plan in 1947, the Executive Order 9981 in 1948, the Berlin Airlift from 1948 to 1949, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in 1949, the fall of China to communism in 1949, the Korean War in 1950 to 1953, and the Fair Deal. The 34th U.S. President was Dwight D. Eisenhower, who served from 1953 to 1961, and he was a Republican. His major items include the 22nd Amendment, the Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement, with the bus boycott, Little Rock 9, etc., the South Asian Treaty Organization, the Suez Crisis in 1956, the Eisenhower Doctrine, the Space Race, the Federal Highway Act of 1956, and Alaska and Hawaii becoming states in 1959, the U-2 spy plane incident in 1960, the farewell address, where he warns the U.S. of dependence on military-industrial complex. The 35th U.S. President was John F. Kennedy, who served from 1961 to 1963. He was a Democrat. His major items include the Alliance for Progress, Baker versus Carr in 1962, the Peace Corps, the Cuba Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, and the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, the New Frontier, the Civil Rights Movement, the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, and the assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963. The 36th U.S. President was Lyndon B. Johnson, who served from 1963 to 1969, and he was a Democrat. His major items include the Cold War, income tax cuts, the Westbury versus Sanders court case in 1964, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Civil Rights Movement, Medicare, Medicaid, the War on Poverty, the Vietnam War, and the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. The 37th U.S. President was Richard M. Nixon, who served from 1969 to 1974. He was a Republican. His major items include Imperial Presidency, the Moon Landing, the 26th Amendment, the Pentagon Papers, the Visit to China, the Visit to USSR, the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, Shuttle Diplomacy, the War Powers Act of 1973, and the Watergate Scandal of 1973. The 38th President was Gerald Ford, who served from 1974 to 1976, and he was a Republican. He was the first appointed president who was not elected. His major items include the Nixon pardon and the OPEC crisis. The 39th U.S. President is Jimmy Carter, who served from 1977 to 1981, and he was a Democrat. His major items include the Panama Canal Treaty of 1977, the 3 Mile Island Incident in 1979, the Egypt and Israel Peace Treaty in 1979, the Iran hostage crisis in 1979, the seizure of Afghanistan by Soviets in 1979, the energy crisis, and the boycott of the 1980 Moscow Olympics. The 40th U.S. President was Ronald Reagan, who served from 1981 to 1989, and he was a Republican. And his major items include hostages released from Iran, the failed assassination attempt of the president, the Falkland Island crisis, the Grenada invasion in 1984, the Nicaragua and the Contras in 1984, the Strategic Defense Initiative. The 41st U.S. President was George Bush, who served from 1989 to 1993, and he was a Republican. His major items include the savings and loan scandal in 1990, the Berlin Wall falling, the invasion of Panama in 1990, the Soviet Union collapse and the Cold War over in 1991, and Operation Desert Storm in 1991. The 42nd President was Bill Clinton, who served from 1993 to 2001, and he was a Democrat. His major items include NAFTA in 1994, troops sent to Bosnia, the Whitewater Scandal, the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995, and the Lewinsky Affair, and the impeachment in 1998. The 43rd U.S. President was George W. Bush, who served from 2001 to 2009, and he was a Republican. His major items include 9/11, the Bush Doctrine, Homeland Security, the Patriot Act, the Bush tax cuts in 2001 and 2003, No Child Left Behind in 2001, Hurricane Katrina in 2005, and the Great Recession from 2007 to 2009. The 44th U.S. President was Barack Obama, who served from 2009 to 2017, and he was a Democrat. His major items include the death of Osama bin Laden, ISIS, and the Great Recession from 2007 to 2009, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, and the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act.